What is up, everybody? This is Adam. Welcome back to Fouled Out. Today, I am going to go over the 8 playoff series that we have starting on Saturday, April 15th. That is currently Friday. So we have the 2 play-in games tonight. I don't think it's going to have a huge impact on any of the picks that we're making or how we really view these playoff series. So we'll go ahead and get this done anyway. But we are power ranking the 8 playoff series from least to most interesting, going over storylines and some of the fun things we're looking forward to in the playoffs. If you haven't had a chance, go back to our podcast that we dropped on Wednesday, the favorite prospects for the NFL draft. It's a super fun podcast, lots of good content in that one for the My Guys that Matt and I picked for the upcoming NFL draft. And if you're super into the draft stuff, Matt and I are going to be back Wednesday with the 2023 NFL draft gambling episode, going over all of our favorite bets for the upcoming NFL draft as well. So we're going to jump into NBA playoffs today. We'll be back Wednesday with more NFL draft stuff. Let's go. All right, we are back, ready to talk some NBA playoffs. I was going to save the NBA playoff stuff until Matt and I got done with our draft coverage. But with the Kings being in the playoffs for the first time in 16 years, I couldn't help myself. Aside from the Kings being in, which is awesome and really looking forward to their series against the Warriors, I feel like this playoffs is one of the more wide open playoffs that we've had in quite some time. I think the bubble playoffs was really wide open, a really weird situation. Last year was a pretty open one as well. You know, it's been better lately ever since Kevin Durant left the Warriors and LeBron left Cleveland, and we don't have to have Warriors versus Cleveland every single year. But I have no idea who's going to win right now. My default is to say that the Bucks are going to meet the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals, and whoever wins that series is going to be our eventual champion. I'm sticking with my pick of the Bucks. I picked the Bucks before the season. I picked the Bucks at our midseason check-in, and I'm going to stick with them now. But I really think this is anybody's championship, and especially the West is wide open. So let's talk about the 8 playoff series. We pretty much have our matchup set except for the 1-8s, but I don't really think that any of the 8 seeds are going to win very many games anyway. So starting with the 8th most interesting series of the playoffs, I'm going to start with the Bucks versus either Chicago or Miami. I would be shocked if this goes past 5 games. I think it's going to be Bucks in 5, maybe even Bucks in 4, no matter who they play. Chicago is a little bit more of an interesting matchup just because they kind of found something at the end of the year after they acquired Pat Bev. They finished the year pretty strong, looked good in a big comeback against Toronto the other day. But I don't think they have enough firepower to compete with Milwaukee. Chicago is a team to me that's kind of built this weird squad that has high upside on certain nights, but most nights is pretty mediocre to okay. I think they got to do something. They got to break up that Levine, DeRozan 2-3 that they got going. The trade for Vucevic just keeps looking worse and worse, honestly, in retrospect. So probably a team that I'm going to put on rebuild watch after they either lose tonight or lose this series to the Bucks. On the other hand, the Heat have a little bit more of a history with the Bucks. They did knock Giannis out of the playoffs in the bubble playoffs. But this is not the same Heat team as back then. This isn't even the same Heat team that we saw go to the Eastern Conference Finals last year. This Heat team is bad. They're near the bottom of the league in every single scoring metric. In a league where scoring is way up, they are still having trouble. They shoot poorly. They play offense very poorly. And I know they have Jimmy Butler, and Jimmy Butler is a phenomenal playoff performer, but they do not have the horses around him. Man, the roster's bad. Bam Adebayo looked horrible in their game against the Hawks the other day. He got bullied by the Hawks front line. And while Bam is a more interesting matchup for Giannis than anything that Chicago is going to be able to throw at him, I don't see the Heat taking more than one from the Bucks. And honestly, I'm just going to give the Heat one because of Jimmy Butler. So either way, this is the least interesting to me. I think the Heat got some hype this season just for being the Heat. And there are certain very famous Celtics fans who way overrate the Heat based on the playoff series last year. So I don't buy into that. I think Bucks in 5 against whoever they play. I guess I'd rather see them play Chicago, but not a very interesting playoff series to me overall. Number 7, we're going to go with the 76ers versus the Nets. I think this would be a lot higher on the list if Ben Simmons was playing or remembered how to play basketball, but he's not. So really, this should just be a series of Philly thanking Brooklyn for taking Ben Simmons off their hands and giving them James Harden in return. The series is somewhat interesting from the perspective that James Harden is very famous for his playoff flameouts. And while he's had a great season, I think the Nets have a lot of different options to throw at him from the wing perspective. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Harden to perform, especially because Philadelphia sees themselves as a championship contender. And if Philly does lose and has an embarrassing first round exit to, quite frankly, an overmanned Nets team, I think there's a scenario this summer where James Harden walks in free agency and Joel Embiid demands a trade. So while there's a lot on the line for the 76ers in this series, I don't see the Nets being able to pull this off. I'm probably going to go Philly in 5, maybe 6, just because Mikal Bridges has been so awesome since he came over from the Suns. That's another thing to watch in this series is, can Mikal Bridges' success translate into the playoffs? And can he be the guy that we've seen in the regular season when it comes to the playoffs? But the Nets have absolutely no answer for Joel Embiid. The Nets are a team full of young switchable wings, a lot of like somewhat interesting players, but not very many great players outside of Mikal Bridges. The front court depth, I mean, I like Nick Claxton, but I think that he is going to get absolutely abused by Joel Embiid in this series. Like, it's going to be bad. Joel is going to go off. So I'll take the Sixers, and let's go Sixers in 5. At least so they can get into the next round and then pull the traditional Philadelphia, lose in the second round to Boston, go home early kind of deal. Coming in at number 6 in my power rankings is the aforementioned Boston Celtics versus the Atlanta Hawks. I don't have this series higher than the other ones because I think it's going to be a better series necessarily. I fully expect Boston to take this in 4 or 5. However, there was a story that came out near the end of the season that Atlanta's ownership was pushing the front office to find any way possible to improve this roster. And that included looking at trades for Trae Young. So I think this series is going to serve as a huge data point for the Atlanta front office on how they should go about building this team. Do they continue to build around Trae Young? Do they blow it up completely and trade Trae Young away along with other pieces? You know, they just traded for DeJounte Murray to pair with Trae Young, and it seems like that hasn't really worked out that well, you know, because they're just about 500 this season and probably a first round exit here. But if Trae's awesome against the Celtics, a really good team with really good defense and a lot of different wings and guards they're going to throw at Trae. If he's awesome in this series, even if they do lose in like 4, 5, 6 games, it's going to raise his value. And when he's at that peak value, do you still want to trade him? It's going to be a tough decision for the Hawks. On the other hand, if he's horrible in this series, his value is going to be probably at an all-time low since he came into the league. If he just completely bombs this series and they get knocked out in 4, you know, can you trade him in that scenario? The value is so low. Can you really get anything back for Trae Young at that point? So I think this is critical to the future of Atlanta, not necessarily because I think that they can compete or win the series, but more because how the team performs is going to inform the decisions they make all summer about trading potential pieces away, getting rid of Trae, keeping Trae and building around him. That's what I'm most interested in this series. Number 5, we're going to head over to the West. finally and go with the Nuggets versus the Wolves or the Thunder, depending on who wins tonight's play-in game. The series is more intriguing to me than a 1-8 should be because I think either of these teams poses potential problems for the Nuggets. And I'm also not sold on the Nuggets as contenders completely. I know they've been the best team in the West all season. I know they're the one seed in the West and they got Jokic and they blah, 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 blah. I think that they've disappointed in the playoffs in the past. I can't fully buy into the Nuggets. There's something holding me back on them. Listen, no matter what happens, Jokic is going to cook everyone. But if you're the Wolves, at least you have Gobert and Cat to throw at him and make him work. That's the Wolves have this weird meta where they have two big centers who share the floor at the same time, and it hasn't really worked great for them this season. But I mean, at least you're going to have big bodies to throw out there and play some defense against him. We'll see what happens with Gobert. He didn't play the play-in game against the Lakers. It's not guaranteed he's going to play tonight either. But man, if you're the Wolves and you invested all of these picks in Walker Kessler and all these players to get Gobert, and he can't play in the play-in games because he punched his teammate, or two, doesn't show up in your first round playoff series, that trade gets more and more brutal every game the Wolves play. On the other hand, you got the Thunder, who, while they have pretty much nothing in the front court to throw at Jokic at this point, with Chet being injured and being out all season, you have SGA, and Shea averaged 32.5, 5, and 6.5 against the Nuggets. So 32.5 points per game against them this season. They had a lot of trouble slowing him down. And when you have a guy who can score like that, and you're pairing him with Josh Giddey, who's, running up and down the court and super exciting, and you got some kind of weird wings and stuff you can throw at the Denver backcourt, you can steal a game or two with Shea. For sure. I could see this being like the series the Nuggets played against the Jazz a couple of years ago, where Donovan Mitchell was just dropping bombs every single game, 40s, 50s. Like, I could see Shea having a pretty elite performance, but the Nuggets still pulling this out because no matter who they play, Jokic is going to go ham in this series and probably in these playoffs. And I think the Nuggets are going to need him to if they want to compete for a championship. So I'll say Nuggets in 5 against the Wolves, and I'll go Nuggets in 6 against the Thunder. I really like the Thunder. I like what they're building, even though they're undermanned and outgunned. I think Shea is worth a game, and I'll give them a second one. Number 4, and I'm lower on this series than I think the majority of people are. But number 4 is going to be the Grizzlies versus the Lakers. People are super high on the Lakers right now, to the point where this series has the closest spread of any series. The Grizzlies are favored minus 140. The Lakers are plus 120 to win. I'm not afraid of the Lakers, or at least not as afraid of as other people are. I think they're getting overvalued because they have LeBron James. And they did a good job kind of resetting this team and making this team better since the trade deadline. They've actually been one of the better teams in the league since that point. But I do not trust LeBron and AD to stay healthy for a whole playoffs. I don't even know if they can stay healthy for a whole series, especially one that's going to be intense against the Grizzlies. And the Grizzlies are not afraid of LeBron James. I think they've made that very clear with their scuffles with him in the past and their scuffles with the Lakers and Shannon Sharp and all that stuff. Say what you will about the Grizzlies. I know that they're obnoxious and they're kind of seen as the villains of the league, but they doesn't afraid of anybody. And that is admirable and something that you need when you're going up against a legendary player like LeBron James. The most interesting thing to me in this series is going to be seeing whether or not LeBron James plays defense. He had his worst year ever on the defensive side of the ball, putting up a defensive rating of 113, which is the highest that he's ever had. Basically, you want that number to be low or close to 100. It's kind of funny. Like I'm sitting here criticizing LeBron for having a 113 defensive rating. That's not all that horrible. Like that's not the worst defensive rating ever, but it's the worst that he's ever had. And I think a large part of that is that he takes plays off on defense. He conserves a lot of energy for offense because he is getting older and he's not the same athlete and player that he used to be. But I don't know if you can beat the Grizzlies if you're taking plays off on one end of the court. I also don't know who stops Ja Morant in this series. There was an anonymous Western Conference coach interviewed earlier this week who said basically Ja is going to feast and get to the rim at will. There's some interesting matchups. Like watching LeBron in the playoffs again, I think is going to be fun. I think he's someone that we need to appreciate before he's gone. And I could see him having 37, 15, and 14 in a couple games this series, like putting up absolutely ridiculous stat lines on offense. But I don't know if the Lakers outside of LeBron and AD have the horses to run with Memphis. And I don't know if LeBron is not prime LeBron if they pull this upset. So I'll go Memphis in 6 here, winning that last game in crypto. I want to call it Staples. I'll never not want to call it Staples, but I think Memphis is the better team, and I'm not as afraid of the Lakers as everybody else seems to be. Number 3, I'm going to go with Cleveland versus the Knicks. The series loses a lot of its luster to me if Julius Randle doesn't play. One of the most interesting storylines with the Knicks this season is that Julius Randle's been completely rejuvenated by the addition of Jalen Brunson. Randle had that all-star appearance 2 years ago, came back the following year and was awful, super inefficient. But having a true point guard on the team has made a huge difference for him, allowing him to efficiently get back to his all-star caliber play from a couple years ago. But if you remember a couple years ago, they played the Hawks in the first round of the playoffs, and Julius Randle was abysmal. It was a total flame out. He was horrible. So I'm very interested to see if this Julius Randle we saw this season can carry his play over into the playoffs, especially because he's got a very tough defensive matchup with Evan Mobley and Jared Allen in the Cavs front court. Like that's going to be tough. Also, interesting subplot in this series. There were a lot of rumors that the Knicks could have had Donovan Mitchell this offseason, but decided to keep the powder dry and not trade for him and go forward with Brunson and Randle, allowing Cleveland to swoop in and get him in shocking fashion. You got to wonder if Donovan has some hard feelings about that. The place that you potentially wanted to go, not wanting you back enough to trade like RJ Barrett and picks for you. Also, how much better the Knicks could have been if they would have had Jalen Brunson and Donovan Mitchell in that backcourt. We might be talking about a contender in the East if they had both those guys, because Brunson's been awesome this season as well. He's really flourished since coming over from the Mavericks, averaging career highs in points and lots of rebounds and assists, and he's had some absolute bangers of games this season. So that's another guy I want to see if he can translate his play into the postseason. I think he's really going to need to in this series because Donovan Mitchell is an excellent playoff performer. He's going to be awesome. If Randle does play and come back from the injury, I think he's going to struggle with Mobley and Allen in that front court. So, man, Brunson is going to really have to step up. He's going to have to ball out, which I think is going to be a lot to ask from him. The playoffs in Madison Square Garden is just awesome. Every time there's a playoff game in Madison Square Garden, it's awesome. It's one of the best venues in sports. So I'm excited to see the Knicks play at home against this Cavs team. But overall, I just have too many questions about the Knicks to pick them to win this series. So going to go Cavs. Let's say Cavs in 6 or 7. I know that's a little bit of a cop out, but I think this could be a really good series. We'll go Cavs in 6. We'll give them 6. Number 2 on my list, the second most interesting playoff series. It's the Sacramento Kings versus the Golden State Warriors. This is number 1 in my heart for obvious reasons. In the 16 years since we made the playoffs, Kings fans have been complaining about not getting respect from the media and other NBA teams and fan bases. The Kings have not deserved respect in 16 seasons. They've been the worst franchise in all of sports over the last 16 seasons, in my opinion. And this series is just more signs of continued disrespect. The Kings are the 3 seed. They won more games than the Warriors this season, and they are plus 220 to win the series, with the Warriors being minus 275. So I'm going to say the same thing about this series that I've been telling Kings fans for the last 16 years. If you want respect, you have to go out and earn it. And there is no better way for this franchise to earn respect from the national media and other fan bases than going out and punching the defending champion in the face. If you make this a series, or if you win this series, that's instant respect. It's instant credibility to everything that the Kings have done this season. I personally think the Kings are being slept on in this series. I mean, this might just be Homer bias, but they're a good team, man. They're excellent on offense. It'll be really interesting to see how this offense fares in the playoffs when everything slows down and everything gets a little bit tighter and you got to play a little bit smarter and a little bit better. The things that worry me for the Kings in this series is, one, they do not play defense, especially at home. They were one of the worst defensive teams in the league and just kind of outraced everybody. But I think that can be a good thing against Golden State, a team that's been known to score in waves where, with Steph, it's coming. You just don't know when. But if this Kings offense can be as good in the playoffs as it was in the regular season, I think they're one of the very few teams that can withstand those Golden State runs because they are going to score so many points. I also think like Golden One Center, the Kings home arena, I think the crowd is just going to be absolutely lit, especially for game 1 on Saturday at 8:30 on ABC, 8:30 Eastern. I think that crowd is just going to be raucous. And the Warriors struggled mightily on the road this season, going 11-30. If the Kings can defend their castle, they can win the series. They got home court. You just got to win the 4 home games, right? The Warriors, the 11-30 on the road Warriors, are going to have to find a way to win at least one game in Sacramento. And I think that could be a tall order with how crazy that crowd's going to be. I will say I am absolutely terrified to play Steph Curry. I don't think that there is a basketball player, and maybe not an active athlete right now, who I'm more afraid to see in a playoff series than Steph. I think it's got to be either Steph or Patrick Mahomes, probably the 2 scariest athletes right now to see in a playoff series. I've really enjoyed Steph's career. I loved Steph when he was at Davidson, to the point where my dad took me to a Final Four game or an Elite 8 game, whatever it was, at Ford Field in Detroit to see Curry live because I was so obsessed with him. And I've been a big fan of his in the NBA until now. I think friendship with Steph is over, at least for a couple weeks, while he torches my team, I'm sure. The analytical side of me wants to say Warriors in 6, but I'm going to go with the fan side of me. Screw it. Kings in 7. Let's go, Sacramento. It's time. It is time to go out there and earn the respect that you so desperately crave. It's time to go prove everybody wrong. Let's do it. So that leaves just one series for my number 1 most interesting series. And I think this is going to be kind of a hot take and shock some people. But I think the most interesting series of the first round is the Suns versus the Clippers. And I think that for 2 reasons. One, I think the series is going to be a lot closer than a lot of people think it is. There was a take going around at the end of the season that the Clippers should throw their last game of the year. And basically, if they would have thrown the game, it would have moved them down to be in the play-in against the Pelicans. But people thought that was a better option than having to play the Suns in the first round, because the Clippers would, quote unquote, be lucky to get 1 game off of the Suns. People are acting like the Suns team is like this undefeatable juggernaut just because they have Booker and Durant. And I know that that combination is really scary, but honestly, they have not played very many games together so far. So we're not 100% sure how that's going to fare in the playoffs. You're also asking Booker, Durant, and Chris Paul to stay healthy for multiple weeks, which I, with Paul and Durant, man, that's a tall order, I think. But I just thought that take was so asinine that you would risk being in a one game elimination game in order to match up with like the Grizzlies or the Nuggets because you're so afraid of Phoenix. And it's funny because a couple of years ago, everybody shit on the Clippers for purposely tanking games at the end of the season in order to dodge, I think it was the Lakers at that point, and play the Mavericks instead. And everybody crapped on them. And now that they didn't do that, they're getting crapped on again. Unfortunately, I think that's just the way of life. If you're a Clippers fan or if you're on the Clippers, it's just that everybody's going to crap on you because you're the Clippers. But I do think that they can give the Suns a run for their money, especially because Paul George sounds like he might be back early in this series. And there's just so much public money and public sentiment on the fact that the Suns are not only going to win, but do it in absolutely dominant fashion. Like people are acting like the Suns are going to sweep this series, easy, done, no problem. But I think the Clippers have a lot to play for. And they still have Kawhi Leonard, who, like, yeah, he gets hurt a lot too. And that's a lot to ask for him and Paul George to stay healthy as well. But when he's playing and when he's on, he's one of the better players in the league, especially in the playoffs. And I think watching him versus Kevin Durant is going to be super fun, especially if Paul George is back to help Kawhi out. The other reason that I think that this is the most interesting series of the first round is that the downside for whoever loses this series is enormous. Like there is more on the line from a narrative perspective in this series than any other series. The Clippers traded Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who we talked about earlier, and a boatload of picks for Paul George, pretty much, and Kawhi Leonard. Like that's something that's going to get lost to history, is that Kawhi told the Clippers, I will come there if you get Paul George for me to play with, which not only makes you question Kawhi, but it kind of adds some color to the trade. But since they made that trade, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has turned into one of the best young players in the league. And the Clippers have lost in round two, lost in the Western Conference Finals, and they've missed the offs completely. So they missed the playoffs last season. And now they are heavy underdogs to the Suns and likely looking at a first round exit. You tack that first round exit onto everything else that's happened since that trade, and that is absolutely disastrous for that franchise. Like when they made that trade, it was not to win a championship, it was to win multiple championships and be a contender. And all they have to show for it so far is one Western Conference Finals appearance where they lost. So the resume is not good. The retrospective on that trade is already horrible. A first round exit on top of all that other stuff is absolutely brutal for that franchise. On the other hand, the Suns made a similar move this season, going all in on Kevin Durant a year after an embarrassing playoff loss to the Mavericks in the second round. They were the best team in the league last season in the regular season, got beat by Luka and the Mavericks. And people are already questioning that trade because of how great Mikal Bridges has been for the Nets. He's blossomed since getting traded there and shown parts of his game that we didn't see in Phoenix. But it's kind of the same thing with Shai. It's like, God, you traded away this guy. He became awesome. And you have all these picks. You need to win to make that trade worth it. And if they get knocked out in the first round as such a heavy favorite, oof, you have last year's playoff embarrassment. You could have another playoff embarrassment on your hands this year after being a heavy favorite against the Clippers. And you just made that trade with a new owner like that. That is going to be a really tough look. It's going to be a really tough look for whoever loses this series. So I think narratively, there's more on the line in this series than any other series. And that's why it's so interesting to me. I also want to see the Clippers prove me right and give the Suns a run for their money. I'm not going to pick the Clippers to win, but I will take the Suns in 7. I think that this ends up being a way better playoff series than many people think it's going to be. And that the national media freaks out and they're like, oh my God, the Suns, it's so close, blah, blah, blah. I can't believe this is happening. But if it does, you heard it here first. So those are the 8 playoff series from least to most interesting to me. And that's it for me today. As always, Fouled Out can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Pocket Cast, Overcast, anywhere you get your podcast. You can hit us up on Twitter at Fouled Out Sports, and you can find Matt on Twitter at Matador_defense. You can find our videos on TikTok at Fouled Out Sports Podcast. It's a long name, but you can't miss it. I've been getting a bunch of shit talked to me on TikTok recently, which means that we're getting more popular. So I appreciate it. Keep the shit talk coming, everybody. So enjoy the playoff games. This is going to come out on Saturday, the 15th. So playoffs start at 1 p.m. and the Sacramento Kings have a home playoff game at 8:30 Saturday night. I will be parked on my couch wearing my brand new Kings zip up that my dad bought me as a playoff present. So thanks for that, Dad. Thank you guys for listening. Enjoy the playoffs. Matt and I will be back on Wednesday with our NFL draft gambling episode. You don't want to miss that one. All right. Bye, guys. Bye, Mom.